Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. I never pick up hitchhikers. Ever. But that night on Route 66, something made me stop. Maybe it was the way she looked. Early 20s, thin, pale, and shivering in the rain. She wasn't holding out a thumb, just standing by the road, staring at the asphalt like she was waiting for something. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was just that uneasy feeling in my gut, the one that whispers when something's off but not quite wrong enough to run. I cracked the window slightly. Need a ride? I asked. She didn't say anything at first, just turned her head and looked at me. Her face was hollowed out by the rain, her dark hair hanging in wet strands. Then she nodded and climbed in without a word. The second the door shut, the air inside my car turned ice cold. I figured it was the storm, or maybe she was just that drenched. I turned up the heat. The radio fizzed and crackled, struggling to hold onto a station before giving up entirely. She sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, fingers twitching slightly. She smelled like wet earth, like old, rotting leaves after the rain. "Where are you headed?" I asked. She hesitated, then murmured a little further. Not much of an answer, but I didn't press. The rain hammered down, turning the road into a dark, glistening ribbon. I kept my eyes forward, but I could feel her sitting there, unmoving, barely even breathing. It was only after a few miles that she finally spoke again. "You don't remember me, do you?" Her voice was soft, but something about it made my skin crawl. I glanced at her. Should I? She turned her head slowly, her dark eyes locking onto mine. And then she whispered my name, my full name. I slammed the brakes so hard the tires shrieked. The car skidded sideways, jerking us both forward. My heart thundered in my chest as I twisted to face her. "How do you know me?" I demanded, but the seat was empty. The door had never opened. The car had never rocked with her exit. She was just gone. The breath in my lungs froze. The only sound was the rain hammering against the windshield, thick and unrelenting. My hands clenched the wheels so tightly my knuckles turned white. And then I saw it. On the fogged-up passenger window, written in shaky, dripping letters. "You left me there." Something inside me cracked open, and suddenly I did remember. 10 years ago, a different storm, but the same road. I was younger, reckless, and in a hurry to get the hell out of town. There had been a girl standing by the highway that night, too. I had seen her in my headlights, soaked, shivering. She had raised a hand, not waving, not thumbing a ride, just reaching, and I had kept driving. A week later, they found her body in a ditch not far from here. Never identified. No name, no missing persons report. Just a girl who disappeared into the rain and never made it home. I stared at the words on the glass, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wiped the window with my sleeve, but the message wouldn't go away. It lingered, the letters dripping like blood. I didn't want to look in the mirror. I really didn't, but I did. And she was there, in the back seat, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, her wet hair clinging to her face. Her lips moved, but the words didn't reach my ears. Her eyes, dark, empty pools, bored into mine through the glass. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone, but the chill remained. The road stretched ahead, black and wet and endless, but I couldn't drive. My hands shook too hard to hold the wheel. The radio crackled back to life. Just a whisper of static at first, then something else, something almost like a voice. A girl's voice. You left me there. I threw the car into drive and floored it. I didn't care how fast I was going. Didn't care about the rain. Didn't care about the twists and turns of the road. I just had to get away. But as the miles flew past, the weight in the car never left. The air never warmed. And when I finally dared to glance at the rear-view mirror again, she was still there. And this time, she was smiling. Story 2. It was just me, my wife, and the long stretch of desert highway between Phoenix and Albuquerque. Midnight. Nothing but black sky and miles of cracked pavement. The road stretching ahead like an open vein. She had dozed off in the passenger seat, curled against the door, her breath slow and steady. The radio had gone to static an hour ago, leaving me with only the hum of the tires against the road and the occasional whisper of wind slipping through the cracks in the windows. I was tired, too tired. My eyes felt heavy, my fingers numb against the wheel. I adjusted the rear view mirror just to keep myself occupied, just to check the road behind me. And I saw him, a man sitting in the back seat, pale face, hollow eyes, lips slightly parted like he was about to speak. I sucked in a breath so fast it hurt my ribs. My heart kicked into overdrive. My hands jerked the wheel, just slightly, just enough for the car to swerve before I forced it back in line. I turned around so fast my neck cracked. Nothing. The back seat was empty. I let out a shaky breath, forced a chuckle. Just tired. That's all it was. A trick of the light, a reflection from the glass. Highway hypnosis. I adjusted the mirror again. He was still there. This time, he wasn't perfectly still. His head had tilted, his lips parted wider. I could see his teeth now, yellowed, uneven. I slammed the brakes. My wife jolted awake, gasping. What the hell? I didn't answer. My heart was hammering against my ribs. The car idled in the middle of the highway, the desert stretching endlessly on either side. No headlights in either direction. No sound except the quiet clicking of the cooling engine. I turned slowly, gripping the headrest of my seat, already knowing what I would see. Nothing. The back seat was empty. A long, shaky breath left my throat. I forced a smile, even though my skin was slick with cold sweat. Sorry, I muttered. Thought I saw something. My wife blinked sleep from her eyes, staring at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. I put the car back in drive and pulled forward. The road felt different now. Heavier. I didn't want to look at the mirror again, but I had to. He was there, closer. His eyes were sunken, ringed in deep bruises. His lips stretched wider, the corners of his mouth curling up in a grotesque mockery of a smile. You shouldn't have come this way. The words weren't spoken. They were whispered, slithering into my ear like a breath of cold wind. I swerved. The tires skidded over loose gravel, the car fishtailing for half a second before I yanked it back on course. My wife screamed, clutching the dashboard. Jesus, what are you doing? I could barely breathe. My fingers were locked around the wheel, my entire body tight with fear. I stared at the road, refusing to look again, refusing to acknowledge what I'd seen. But my wife did. She reached up, adjusted the mirror, and froze. Her fingers went white against the glass. Her breath hitched. Oh, is that? A bolt of ice shot through my spine. I couldn't answer. Her grip on my arm was iron. Don't stop. Just drive. I didn't need to be told twice. The speedometer crept higher. 80, 85, 90. The road was nothing but a black ribbon unfurling ahead, the desert on either side stretching endlessly into the night. But in the mirror, his skin had begun to peel. Thin, papery strips curling away from his face, revealing something dark and wet beneath. His teeth were sharper now, and his eyes were mine. I punched the gas. The desert blurred. The wind screamed against the windows. My wife was clutching the seat, whispering under her breath, something close to a prayer, something I couldn't understand. The faster we went, the worse it got. His face was unraveling. The grin never faded. His lips had peeled away completely, leaving nothing but a row of jagged teeth, stretched wide. We didn't stop until we found a motel, the first one we saw, a flickering neon sign buzzing in the darkness like an open wound. I pulled into the lot so fast the tires screeched, sending up a plume of dust. We stumbled out of the car. Neither of us looked back. The motel was a dump, but we didn't care. We took the first room they had, a dingy little thing with a single bed and a mirror above the sink. My wife collapsed onto the mattress, still shaking. I locked the door. I stood there for a long time, my breath slow and uneven. My hands were still trembling. It was over. Had to be. I ran a hand down my face, stepped into the bathroom. I turned on the light, reached for the faucet, and then I looked up into the mirror, and he was there, closer than ever, smiling. Story 3. I've been driving for hours. The mountains stretched out in front of me, long and endless, dark silhouettes against an even darker sky. The road twisted and turned through the hills, cutting through the wilderness like a scar. No street lights, no other cars, just the hum of my engine and the occasional flicker of something in the trees. I wasn't supposed to be on this road. My GPS had died an hour ago, and my phone had no signal. But I had taken a wrong turn somewhere, and now here I was, alone, lost, and nearly out of gas. The needle hovered over empty, and the warning light had been on for miles. My hands were tight on the wheel, and I kept telling myself I'd find something soon. I had to. Then, like a mirage in the distance, I saw it. A gas station. It looked ancient, like it had been sitting there for decades, forgotten by time. The sign on top flickered weakly, buzzing in the still air. The pumps were old, the kind with spinning numbers and faded labels. A single light hung above the door, casting a sickly yellow glow on the cracked pavement. I almost didn't pull in. Something about it felt wrong, like it wasn't really there. But I didn't have a choice. I rolled to a stop beside one of the pumps and honked. Nothing happened at first. Then, from the darkness, a man stepped forward. Tall, too tall, thin as a scarecrow, with deep-set eyes and skin that looked stretched too tight over his bones. His clothes were yellowed with age, stiff like they had been worn too long without ever being washed. He stood there for a moment, just looking at me. Then, in a voice as dry as dead leaves, he said, "You lost?" I clear my throat. Just need to fill up. His mouth twisted into something that was supposed to be a smile, but there was no warmth in it. We don't get many travelers this late. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. He moved slow, deliberate, reaching for the gas nozzle. I sat there, gripping the wheel, trying not to look at him in the mirror. The night was too quiet. The air felt heavy, pressing against me. Finally, he finished and gave the hood of my car a light pat. "Go ahead inside to pay." I didn't want to. I wanted to throw a few bills out the window and drive away. But I didn't have cash. So I stepped out of the car and walked toward the door, my stomach twisting with something that felt a lot like dread. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air was thick, stale. It smelled of rotting wood, old dust, something else beneath it, something sour. The shelves were lined with faded cans, labels peeling, brands I had never seen before. The refrigerator hummed, but inside, the drinks were covered in a thin layer of grime. And then there was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that made your ears ring, like the place itself was holding its breath. I approached the counter and slid my card forward. The man didn't take it. He just stared. Cash only. My stomach sank. "I don't have cash." His expression didn't change. But then something did change his eyes. His gaze flicked to the window, and in an instant, his whole body went rigid. "You need to leave. Now." I blinked. "What?" His fingers twitched. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. His voice was lower this time. Urgent. "Get in your car. Drive. Don't stop. Don't look back." My pulse thundered. "Why?" He didn't answer. He just grabbed my arm, his grip colder than ice. I turned to the window, and I saw them. 4 figures, standing by my car. They hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. They weren't walking, weren't moving, just standing, watching. Their heads were tilted at an unnatural angle, too far to the side, like their necks were barely holding them up. Their clothes were colorless, blending into the night. Their faces, if they even had faces, were hidden in the darkness. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. Who are they? The man's grip tightened. They only come when strangers stop here. I could barely breathe. "If you stay, they'll take you with them." That was all I needed to hear. I turned and ran, shoving the door open so hard it smacked against the wall. The figures didn't move, but I felt their eyes on me, boring into me, through me. I yanked open my car door, dove inside, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, coughed. The figures stepped forward, just a little. I slammed my foot down on the gas, tires screeching against the pavement. The figures didn't chase me. They just watched. I didn't slow down, didn't look back. I drove for miles before I finally pulled over, hands shaking so bad I could barely grip the wheel. My breath came in ragged gasps. Then I grabbed my phone and opened the map. There was nothing there. No gas station. No roads leading to one. Just empty highway, like it had never existed. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, my brain refusing to understand. Then, slowly, I raised my eyes to the rearview mirror, and my breath caught in my throat, because standing in the distance, barely visible in the red glow of my taillights, they were still watching me.